Well, hello there, fellow cultists. This is DM Nell, and I'm back with another episode of Shadow the Demon Lord Talk. This is episode number 75, and this is a special episode because I am actually recording this on D-Monday, which makes this is like the Sabbath, right? So, yeah, I feel pretty special. I feel like I have the power of the Demon Lord behind me for this episode. So, as would be appropriate, we are talking Demon Lord stuff, and this is the episode where we talk about corruption, which is very Demon Lord. In fact, out of all of the role-playing games that I've played over my many years of playing role-playing games, I've never really played a game that had a mechanic like corruption. I've played games that had, sanity mechanics. Call of Cthulhu has that, but nothing actually worked like corruption. So today we're going to talk about corruption and how it fits into the Shadow of the Demon Lord game. So the corruption rules can be found primarily in the core rulebook, and those are the simplest corruption rules that you're going to find in the core rulebook. But there is also another supplement that expands the corruption rules. So I'm going to look at the rules in the core rulebook first, and then we're going to go to the supplement known as the Price of Evil, and talk about the expanded rules from that supplement. So, corruption, what is it? So basically, the corruption mechanic explains the nature of evil in the Shadow of the Demon Lord universe, multiverse, whatever you want to call it. And the nature of evil basically is that the Demon Lord himself, which of course, as we talked about in my last episode, the Demon Lord was once everything, and then it slowly became the Demon Lord over the course of many eons, however long it took for the genies to create the universe by stealing the matter and energy from God, and what was left over was the Demon Lord. And this Demon Lord was very angry, very bitter, very resentful. You could say it was driven mad by the experience, or you could say that it invented madness because, there was nothing before the Demon Lord other than the Demon Lord. So everything that exists today comes from the Demon Lord. And the aspect of the Demon Lord that wants to reclaim its belongings, which is basically all the matter and energy in all the universes that were created from the genies. That is that quality, that aspect of the Demon Lord is what corruption is tied to. So corruption basically is the way that the universes are trying to get back to being one with the Demon Lord, because corruption undoes the work that the genies did. Now, the genies, when they use the words of power and the words of creation to create everything, that formed the universes from shapeless matter and energy into organized shapes and forms. And that process created order out of chaos. Well, chaos wants to return to a chaotic state. So corruption is a manifestation of chaos. It is the way that the universe and the world is trying to undo what the genies did. And that's why it's a bad thing, because, we want order in our universe because that's what we live in, right? And same thing in the Demon Lord world. And so the act of corruption weakens the order that the genies created. And it also weakens the barrier that separates the void from, the world. So that is how the corruption mechanic is tied into the lore of the cosmology and everything that we talked about in the last episode. So gaining corruption is bad, and nobody should want to gain corruption. And quite frankly, as a DM of Shadow of the Demon Lord, I've DM'd 4 campaigns now, and it has been very difficult to incorporate corruption into the game. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but corruption still remains a core part of the game, and there are important reasons for that, which I'll also talk about later. But let's get back to the core rulebook has rules for corruption, and it talks about it on page 36 as evil leaving a stain on the mortal soul that can be removed only by the devil's haunting hell's depths. But that has actually been expanded on more in the Price of Evil supplement, which we'll get to. So it talks about how you gain corruption. So how do you gain corruption? Well, you gain corruption by performing acts of great evil. And some of those are bullet pointed here through murder, harming an innocent by spreading a disease, poisoning a well, or being reckless with magic. Stealing for personal gain, learning spells from dark traditions such as forbidden or necromancy, using certain relics. So these are very broad ways that you can gain corruption. And as you gain corruption, then you become more corrupt, and things start to manifest on you to show your corruption. And it's difficult to get rid of corruption, as it talks about in the atonement section. In the core rulebook, it has a corruption effects table, which talks about your corruption score. Once you achieve a score of 0 to 3, there's really no effect on you. You have corruption, but it's really not manifesting on you as of yet. But once you start hitting a score of 4 to 6, that's when you start to manifest outwardly the fact that you are corrupt, or you're being corrupted. And then a score of 7 to 8 is even more obvious, and then a score of 9 or more is really bad. So I'm not going to read all this, but there's also the chance that you will get a mark of darkness. So gaining a mark of darkness outwardly shows, well, most of them outwardly show the fact that you have corruption. You have gained corruption. And this is something that will never go away. Once you gain a mark of darkness, even if you manage to get rid of a point or two of corruption, your mark of darkness stays with you until you die. So we'll talk about that more in a little bit as well. But those are the rules from the core rule book. How you gain a mark of darkness basically is every time you gain a point of corruption, you have to roll a d20, and if you roll under your, at or under your current corruption score, then you gain a mark of darkness. So mark of darkness is bad. I mean, you can, some of them isn't so bad. Like number 1, if you roll a 1, then you never cast a reflection in mirrors. Yeah, it's not that bad. Compared to when you roll a 20, once each week, a child within 1 mile of you sickens and dies. Yeah, that's pretty bad. And then there's lots of stuff in between that is, kind of more or less just outward signs of your corruption. So those are the rules. It's basically, it takes up most of one page in the core rulebook. Now, the supplement Price of Evil greatly expands the rules for corruption. And this is a lovely picture. These 3 individuals are quite corrupt. Is this a Paganisi? No, this is a Matteo Spirito and Pat Loboico. So I'm not sure which one actually did this painting, but wow. That's pretty horrifying. So, yeah, you've got this trio, and I actually might throw this trio into into an adventure, because these guys are terrible. So yeah, you've got this woman over here that looks pretty bad. You got this dude here. It's got markings all over him and a couple eyeballs on his hands. And you got this guy. Looks like his flesh is rotting off. He's a halfling, according to the feet. So yeah, he's looking pretty gruesome. He's also dripping shit out of his diaper. So yeah, all of these guys are bearing marks of darkness. Some more than others, I'm trying to say. All right, so great painting there. So this again, this is The Price of Evil. Writing design Robert J. Schwab. Editing Tom Carteret. Art direction Kara Hamilton and Robert Schwab. Proofreading Jay Spite. Layout and graphic design Carol Hamilton, and interior illustrations Matteo Spirito and Pat Laboyko. All right, so those are the people that put this wonderful supplement together. Now, the first couple pages talks about why the supplement exists and what the nature of evil is. Now, why the supplement exists is basically Schwab's explanation of why corruption was put into the game and how it ties into the cosmology of the setting. And so the why it's put into the game basically is because of the cosmology, but it also is a way for players to play whatever they want to play, but have there be some consequences to the choices that the players make. Now, right now, if you were to play Dungeons and Dragons and your character just outwardly murders somebody, just out of the blue, just kill somebody for no reason whatsoever, an innocent. There's no in-game mechanic to punish or to have consequences on that character. Now, the DM can always say, well, now you're a wanted. There are wanted posters all over. Somebody is hiring bounty hunters. There's a bounty on your head. All of those things can take place. But there's no real mechanic in the game that is consequential to the act of murder. So unless the DM throws all of those story elements in to make consequences, the players are free to basically be as evil as they want to be without it really affecting them at all. Shadow of the Demon Lord is different. If a character does something despicable, evil, and vile, they gain corruption. This is the consequence for being evil in this universe. Being evil frays the order created by the genies, and it causes the universe to be less stable. And so, of course, on an individual level, that is very minute, but it's still very impacting to the individual. And so the individual is affected by the evil acts that they make, or that they do. And so that is all explained in the introduction. Then it talks about the nature of evil, specifically to get to the next section, which is gaining corruption, and how can you gain corruption. Now, the previous portion here, the nature of evil, helps the DM understand, the difference between killing somebody in self-defense and killing somebody just because you didn't like them the way that they looked at you. There is a difference, and some bad acts can be justified, but even the bad acts that can be justified are still bad. Murdering somebody in self-defense is still murder. Sure, you can justify it by the fact that the person was trying to kill you, but it's still murder. Now, is the act of killing this person who was trying to kill you better the world in some way or worsen it? That is the determination that the DM has to make in order to determine whether or not to give out a point of corruption. So this is what I talked about earlier when I said that it's very difficult as a DM to give out corruption in this game, because you really have to be the judge of what is crossing the line. And crossing the line in a role-playing game after playing for 35 years and seeing some of the shit that I've seen players do, and I've done myself as a player, that's tough, because there's never really been consequences in any of the games I've ever played. So, I could sit here and say, murdering a town guard just to get past the gate would be worthy of gaining a point of corruption. But if you're getting past the gate to save somebody whose life is in danger, is it justified to kill the innocent guard? Well, the guard's not innocent because he's hired by the people that kidnapped the princess or whatever. So it can always be justified, but the DM has to decide, is this act that the players just did cross the line? And that is really, really tough, because once you hand out a point of corruption, it is super tough to get rid of it, which we'll get to. But and the players are always going to fight you on it, because they're always going to find some justification for what they just did. So that is what this section here is talking about. And then we get into the corruption and gaining corruption. So there are 3 ways you can gain corruption: through evil actions, which is kind of what I was just describing, forbidden knowledge, and exposure to evil. Now, the other 2, forbidden knowledge and exposure to evil, are easier ways of handing out points of corruption, because these are ways of corruption being imposed upon somebody, as opposed to a willing act of evil propagated by a player character. So the first section, evil actions, talks about what we just talked about. So it goes over some of the things that were in the core rulebook that I already read, but it kind of expands on it too. So it says corruption, examples of things that could cause a point of corruption include, but are not limited to, murder, torture, rape, cannibalism, genocide, and general diabolical mischief, such as the poisoning of a village's well, contaminating a food supply, or the malevolent burning of a building important to a community. So all of those things are obviously evil, but, again, some players may justify it. In my last campaign, the players burned down an autarch's manor. Well, the autarch was, had been turned into a monster, and the rest of the occupants of the manor were cultists. So was burning down that manor then considered an evil act, because, all that was inside were cultists and, a monster? I would say no, and I didn't give out corruption for that. So, the malevolent burning of a building important to a community also depends on the situation. So, like I said, that first way of gaining corruption through evil actions, very, very difficult to justify, but it can be done. In fact, there was one scenario in my last campaign where the players were going through this tower, and the tower had a bunch of ghouls in it, and there were non-ghouls in these prison cells. And so one of the prisoners was obviously insane, and he was starving, and he was begging for the players to, give him a morsel from the other cell, which was a dead person. So one of the player characters, basically chopped off a limb and threw it in there. I gave him a point of corruption for that. And his justification was, well, he was starving and he wanted it. And my reasoning for giving the point of corruption was basically, you just chopped off a dead person's body, thereby, maiming a dead person, desecrating a dead body, and tossing it to another person so that they can eat a dead person's rotting flesh. There is no way you can justify that as being an act of mercy. That's just downright evil. So, the player character was cool with that. I think he was just kind of testing me with that one. But anyway, that's one way that I have given out a point of corruption due to the character's actions. So forbidden knowledge is another way, and it talks about here some ways that you can gain corruption through learning about the histories and practices of debased people, the learning of a vile language like dark speech, discovering of dark magic traditions like forbidden tradition, demonology, things like that, understanding of certain vile relics. Simply learning these things and how they can work can afflict the mind and thereby stain the soul. Likewise, possession of a dark relic can also have lasting effects on the soul. So, if somebody happens to pick up the, what is that? What is that book in here? The book of, will I find it? I know. Here it is. Okay. It is the Book of Whispers. So this is a sinister tome. So, should somebody that has read that book through and through get a point of corruption? It doesn't say in the description of the text itself here in the core rulebook, but I would say, yeah, if somebody's reading that tome in my campaign, they're going to get a point of corruption. At least a point, maybe a D3 points. So anyway, forbidden knowledge. That's an easier way to hand out points of corruption if you're wanting to incorporate that more into your game. Exposure is another way. So exposure is talked about in this one paragraph. It says, evil begets evil. Demons sometimes corrupt those they possess. Those who make foul bargains with devils can be corrupted. Certain lands have been so stained by dark magic that to traverse them is to imperil one's immortal soul. Similarly, spells of dark magic can attack the soul directly, twisting it into something dark and foul. So you can gain corruption by all of those means. So you have characters, traversing through particularly evil patch of forest that maybe was tainted by a particularly powerful evil devil or undead creature, then they may have to make some challenge rolls to avoid gaining corruption just by being there. Exposure is another way that corruption can be imposed upon a character. Now, the effects of corruption is expanded upon in the book here as well. And it actually talks a little bit more about how corruption affects immortal characters differently than it does mortal characters. Now, mortal characters are characters who have souls that are separate from their physical bodies. So that would be like humans, halflings, dwarfs, things like that. Immortals are like the Fae classes, or the Fae ancestors, I should say. Elves, obviously, fairies, fawn. Those are all immortals. Their souls are not separate from their bodies. Their souls are basically a part of their body. And so corruption affects them differently. The way corruption affects a mortal soul is that not only does it warp the body that the soul is inhabiting, but once the body dies, then the soul is sent to hell, or it's dragged to hell, dragged down into hell, in order for the corruption to be purged from the body by the devils inhabiting hell, versus how it affects immortals. Now, when an immortal dies, when an immortal gains corruption, there's no danger of the immortal soul going to hell because the immortal soul is its body. However, what happens is the more corruption an immortal gains, the more attractive it becomes to the inhabitants of hell. So the devils in hell, they sense this growing evil in the world, and at some point they will drag it down to hell in order to make it another devil. So that's how immortals are affected by the accumulation of corruption. They could actually be dragged down to hell and transformed into a devil or some sort of devil servant to serve Diabolus in hell. All of that's described here in the supplement. There's also an expanded corruption effects table. So in the core rulebook, it was a very simple table, but here is expanded upon. So when you gain corruption or points of corruption, you look at this table here to determine what effect it has on you. 0 is no effect. With a 1 point of corruption, you now roll a d20. If the number rolled is equal to or less than your corruption score, roll on the mark of darkness severity table, which is below this. If you have 2 to 3 points of corruption, roll a d20, and if the number rolled is equal to or less than your corruption score, roll on the mark of darkness severity table. In addition, you gain the Touch of Darkness trait. The Touch of Darkness trait is other creatures can sense the evil in you. In social situations involving creatures that have 0 corruption, you make the attack with 1 bane. So social attacks, that's a part of the core rule book. I really haven't delved too much into social combat, is how it's referred to in the core rule book. I usually tend to role play those scenarios. So in this case, what I would do is I would apply a bane where appropriate in just a role playing situation. If a player is trying to interact with somebody and trying to convince them of something or trying to get by with something or whatever, then there would be a bane associated with some challenge roll that they would need to make in order to get their way. But if you actually use social combat as it is outlined in the core rulebooks, then if you make a social combat attack roll, you make it with 1 bane when you have the Touch of Darkness by having 2 to 3 points of corruption. If you have 4 to 5 points of corruption, roll a d6. If the number rolled is equal to or less than your corruption score, roll on the mark of darkness severity table. So you go from rolling a d20 and gaining a mark of darkness if you roll equal to or less than 3. Then once you get to 4 or 5 corruption points, you roll a d6. And if the number rolled is equal to or less than your corruption score, then you get another mark of darkness. That's pretty harsh. That is some harsh shit there. I mean, you go from barely accumulating marks of darkness to rapidly accumulating marks of darkness the more corruption you gain. And you also get a Slave of Darkness quality. So the wrongness you admit intensifies. All animals are hostile to you, and the number of banes imposed on attack rolls in social situations from your Stain of Darkness trait increases to 3. So if you manage to accumulate 6 to 7 points of corruption, you roll on the mark of darkness severity table, just straight out. No more checking to see if you roll at or below. You just roll on the severity table and you gain whatever corruption is on the table that you roll from. In addition, your corruption manifests in minor physical ways. You might develop marks under your skin, lose your fingernails, or develop a sore that never heals. If you have 8 points of corruption, roll on the mark of darkness severity table. You also gain the infernal interest trait. Infernal interest, hell takes an interest in you. Whenever you make a fate roll from being incapacitated, you must roll twice and use the lower number. And then, of course, if you get 9 or more points of corruption, then you roll on the mark of darkness severity table again, and you also gain the damned trait. Hell comes to claim you. If you are immortal, each time you complete a rest, roll a d20. On a 1, you disappear, dragged down to hell, where you spend the rest of your days. If you are a mortal, the first time you become incapacitated, you die. And your soul is dragged down to hell, where it spends the next few decades being purged of its corruption before being recycled back into the cycle of life. So, marks of corruption. There are now severity tables for the marks of darkness. Before, there was just one table in the core rulebook that had 20 marks of darkness. Now you've got a minor table, a moderate table, a major table, and an unspeakable table. So depending on how many points of corruption you have, you roll a d6, and that determines which table you have to, which mark of darkness table you get your mark of darkness from. Now, obviously, the weakest mark of darkness, or the least impacting, are the minor ones. These are things like you have a rattling cough. Sometimes you expel bloody maggots in your fits of cough. You lose a sense of smell, taste, or touch. Flowers and small plants within short range of you wither and die. So those are some examples of the minor marks. Moderate marks are things like you never cast reflection in mirrors. You grow a second row of teeth in your mouth and a new row of teeth in an unexpected place. Ah! And then what else? Fine black scales cover your arms from the elbows down to your fingers, and your legs from your knees to your toes. Then you got the major marks of darkness. Those are things like the contact of any holy symbols, icons, or other religious paraphernalia on your skin burns you. When you touch or are touched by such an object, you gain 1 damage per round of sustained contact. You can no longer see faces. Your spine gives birth to a fleshy, hairless tail that ends in a knob. And then finally, the unspeakable marks of darkness are things like the child within a mile of you sickens and dies once a week, an unending stream of liquid filth spills from your anus. I guess we know what's affecting the halfling on the front page of this supplement now. Whenever you rest, your soul or your mind, if you're immortal, goes to hell. When you complete a rest, you gain insanity equal to your will score. Or if you roll a 20, you gain a demonic talent. Hey, you can use the table provided in Shadow or the tables in the Hunger and the Void to determine what talent you gain. So, it's not all bad if you're lucky and roll a 20. Otherwise, if you roll a 19, your body warps and twists, becoming a mess of emaciated limbs and bulging bags of skin. Take a -4 penalty to your speed. So you got that going for you. So anyway, yeah. That determines the different marks of darkness severity. So luckily, you don't have a chance of getting an unspeakable mark of darkness until you have at least 7 points of corruption. That's the first chance that you have of gaining an unspeakable mark of darkness. It gets better at 8, and it gets better even more at 9. But at any rate, that's pretty horrid stuff. Now, if you have characters that manage to get that much corruption, then you're obviously playing in an evil game, and they're just trying to be as evil as they can be. So, you might as well have fun with it, and they're probably having fun with it as well. So, that's a different type of game. It is going to be rather unlikely that your players are going to want to gain corruption in just your standard we're trying to save the world game. So unless they're just really unlucky by just getting a bunch of corruption from various things that's imposing corruption upon them, then it's unlikely that they're going to be affected that much by the stuff in this supplement. However, if they do gain corruption, there are ways of ridding oneself of corruption. And that's covered here in the redemption section of the supplement. So, but it does talk about how difficult it is for one to rid themselves of corruption. You can't just say, well, I'm going to be good from here on out. Your character actually has to display that in game. And that's of course if the game continues. Now, if they retire their character and they say they're going to pursue a life of goodness from there on out, then fine. You can role play that out, and you can say it's 20 years from now you have been such a good steward of the world, and such a benefit to your fellow man that you have purged all the corruption from your soul. That's one way to handle it. But if you are role-playing this through the game, so let's say you have a bunch of corruption by 5th level. If you're trying to rid yourself of corruption for the remainder of the game, so from 5th to 10th level, you're going to have to significantly change the way your character has been played up to this point. Not only do they not do the things that got them corruption in the first place, but they have to be the opposite. They have to display several of these qualities that are bullet pointed in this supplement. Be wholesome and pure in all things. Be chaste, temperate, and free of anything that would sully your body. Be generous in your dealings with others. Give away your riches to those in need. Share your food, water, and anything else to care for people who would otherwise go without. Protect the innocent from harm. Shield others who are weaker than you to safeguard them from danger, and be willing to sacrifice yourself and your possessions to do what is right. Always strive to do what is right and just. Never give in to your hatred, frustration, or greed. Show mercy to all those who deserve it. Destroy evil in all its incarnations, but do everything you can to save those who might be redeemed. Be compassionate in your dealings with others and tolerant of other beliefs, attitudes, and lifestyles. Show humility in all your doings, give credit where it's due, and seek no rewards for your actions. So all of these things have to be displayed over a period of time in order for 1 point of corruption to be removed. And even then, you have to make a will challenge roll with a number of banes equal to your corruption in order to rid yourself of 1 point of corruption. So very, very difficult to get rid of corruption. You can also get rid of corruption through magic. There are some spells, particularly the atonement spell, that will help you get rid of it. However, it also talks about how it's not easy to find someone that's willing to cast the atonement spell. The Cult of the New God opposes people ridding their souls of corruption. They feel like you should do your time in hell to get rid of your corruption because you're a piece of shit, and getting rid of it here in the world is not fair to the people that you have wronged. So you need to die. You need to go to hell and have your corruption purged through torture for decades. That's what the Cult of the New God believes. There are also some characters that have found a way to rid others of corruption, and they're called sin eaters. You have to track down a sin eater who are outlawed by the Cult of the New God, incidentally, and persecuted by the Cult of the New God. And so, if you happen to luck out and find a sin eater, then they might help you get rid of some of your corruption as well. So very, very tough to get rid of corruption if you happen to accumulate a significant amount of it. So yeah, these are all rules in this supplement. This is kind of an advanced gameplay supplement, I would say. So if you just want to keep it simple, I would go with what's in the core rulebook. But if you want to ratchet it up a notch or 2 or 10, then definitely go by the Price of Evil, because this will make your game pretty real when you start introducing more and more corruption into your player character's actions. So all right then, that's about it. So that's corruption, and again, this is the only game that I've played that actually has this type of mechanic, and I love it. I love it because now we have a mechanic that punishes evil actions. So no more murder hobos unless you want to start gaining corruption. And the minute they start gaining corruption, that's going to modify I guarantee you it's going to modify your player's behavior. Either that, or it's going to make them really work hard to justify all of their evil as fuck actions, which is going to be fun for you to watch them squirm. So anyway, that's all I got for tonight. This is again a special D Monday episode. So thank you all for watching. Appreciate it. Once again, if you like the videos that I produce, then help others find them by liking it in YouTube or disliking it. Either way, it gets attention. Leave a comment if you'd like to chat about anything that was covered here, or if you have more interesting ways of how you incorporate corruption into your games. I'd love to hear them. So put them in the comments, and I'd love to read and chat more about the Shadow of the Demon Lord game, because that's what this show's all about. It's Shadow of the Demon Lord talk, after all, right? So that's it. I'm out of here. Hail the Demon Lord. Stop recording.